Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Social Flight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have an amazing show for you this evening. F-15 fighter pilot and fighter weapons school patch wearer Colonel Donn Yates is here, and we're going to talk about his aviation story, lessons in preparing our nation for combat readiness, and his latest venture, the Electra ultra-short takeoff aircraft. So it's going to be a fun evening, so buckle up and we will get going. Now, before we get started, just a few things. Well, we're back from AirVenture, and if you were out there and I had a chance to meet you, I just want to say thank you. It was so wonderful to spend the entire week out there talking to so many folks that are on the other side of this camera. I have to tell you, you do this show, you're staring right into a camera, there's no one else here. Getting to meet you in person is truly one of the most fun things that I ever do, and I was thrilled to be able to give away a ton of different things. We gave away a set of Michelin tires. We gave away a Lightspeed Delta Zulu headset. We gave away, cases of oil and spark plugs and oil filters. You name it, it was all there, and we had a ton of fun. So I just want to say thank you again if I had a chance to meet you there. And if not, if I get a chance to meet you in some other facet of life or at another air show, I'd be absolutely thrilled to do that. Now, even if you didn't get a chance to go to AirVenture, there's more happening with prizes, and that is our Fly to Win challenge. On Friday, we end this Fly to Win challenge cycle, and that is we are giving away an Aspen E5 electronic flight instrument that's glass for your panel, and all you need to do is just get the free SocialFlight mobile app and check in at your local airport. There's a Fly to Win challenge. There's a challenge button right on that. That you go through that, you'll be able to check in. Even if you only check in at one airport, you're entered in to win. If you get on our leaderboard and you're able to get in the top group on that, then you get multiple entries. But I am thrilled to be able to give that away. And as soon as that's over, we're going to be giving away another prize. I believe it's going to be another Delta Zulu headset. So we're always giving stuff away, and just never forget that SocialFlight.com and the free SocialFlight mobile apps for Apple and Android devices have tens of thousands of aviation events, destinations, cool things to do, webinars like tonight's show, courses in our FAA Learning Center. It's all there just to support GA, and so I hope you participate and spend some time in that. Tonight's broadcast is brought to us by Lightspeed Aviation and their flagship Delta Zulu headset with a Canary carbon monoxide detection and hearing acuity customized audio. It is a wonderful, wonderful headset. And yet, if we're at AirVenture or we're reading the news, they released another headset. It's not the flagship, it's a step down, and that is their Lightspeed Zulu 4. Be sure to check that out. It looks so cool. It's a black headset. It's got AI-enabled noise reduction for your communications, for your phone communications out with Bluetooth, new ear seals, longer cord. There's just a ton to do. And so check it all out. I'm just thrilled to be able to tell you all about it. Now, on to tonight's program. Callsign Master Colonel Donn Yates served for 25 years as an Air Force fighter pilot and Army infantryman. And pay attention to that last part because he's got a very, very unique path into the cockpit. During his storied career, he commanded a Joint Special Operations Aviation Detachment, a fighter squadron, an operations group, and the largest F-15 fighter wing in the Air Force. He's a graduate and former instructor of the U.S. Air Force Fighter Weapons School, the Air Force equivalent of TOPGUN, for those of you familiar with the Navy version. And following his retirement from the Air Force, Donn served as Chief Operating Officer for the 5th largest private jet charter company in the United States. Following that, he led business development and strategy efforts for the Air Dominance Division at Boeing, and his portfolio included the F-15, the F-18, the EA-18, the MQ-25, T-7, and Phantom Works. So a huge, huge portfolio underneath his leadership there at Boeing. And now Donn is currently Vice President of Government Programs for Electra.aero. That is developing incredible ultra-short takeoff and landing aircraft for the next generation of air transportation. Donn's a Harvard Kennedy School National Security Fellow and holds advanced degrees in strategy from the School of Advanced Air and Space Studies in the Air Command and Staff College. I am thrilled to have him with us here tonight. Please welcome to Social Flight Live, Donn Master Yates. How are you doing, sir?
Good, Jeff. Woo! I'm nervous. That was quite the intro there, so I appreciate it and really humble. Thanks for the invitation.
Hey,
Good to
you
see you.
have earned every single tiny piece of that. So there's a lot to dive into. I want to start understanding your background because you have a very, very unique path into the cockpit. The fact that you started from an Army perspective before going to the Air Force, can you fill me in? Help us understand this path that you took, and even younger in life, whether you knew you were going to be in the cockpit.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Like most of us, grew up looking up in the sky and just loved airplanes. And, went through high school, kind of growing up, trying to figure life out. Knew I wanted to fly, but probably the commitment to academics wasn't quite there. And applied to the Air Force Academy, some other stuff, didn't even come close to being eligible for that. So I ended up going to college at Texas A&M for 2 years, where I was in the Corps of Cadets. And again, doing really good core, really good ROTC stuff, but not really good grades type stuff. So at the conclusion of my 2 years at Texas A&M, I dropped out, joined the Army, and I was in the infantry for a few years, where I like to tell people that was cool for about 5 minutes. And then I was like, what the heck did I do? So I actually applied 7 times to be a helicopter pilot and got turned down 7 times. And so, I'm sure we're going to get into it in the podcast, but throughout my career, I would run into these really amazing Army pilots that were special operations pilots, and I would tell them that story, and they would always look at me and go, "Well, sir, it looks like it worked out for you." So, I got out of the Army, got married, started a family, and basically launched on the journey of life. And somewhere around the first kid, I decided to throw my name in the hat for basically officer training school. That was a crazy story in and of itself, but I got accepted. There were like 380 applicants, and they took 6. I ended up going to Laughlin for pilot training, and then graduated and went to the Strike Eagle. I flew in the Strike Eagle my whole career, but pretty, not a lot of general aviation experience. Not a lot of I kind of did some work around the airport at an FBO, but it was just one of those things that I just didn't quite have the depth yet, but I had the heart. And so that's really what was cool. I showed up. I was the oldest guy in my class. I was the only one with kids. And while everybody out was out, kind of having fun during pilot training, I was chair flying with my broomstick, looking at my white paper poster of the instrument panel and just chair flying and make sure I was doing that. So that's kind of the journey of how I got to be in the cockpit, but definitely non-traditional for sure.
Yeah, no kidding. And I mean, you're being, I think, a little exceedingly humble because getting into that position, and especially the F-15, I mean, that's that's no small feat. I mean, you have to show some heart for that. Tell me a little bit about getting selected for the F-15.
Yeah, it was interesting. So I always loved fighter jets at large, but of course I was affected by Top Gun. If Proton is watching this, I'm going to give the Navy some shout outs. But I had this really cool red Camaro, and on the back was a Fly Navy sticker. I was there for opening night of Top Gun, and for the longest time, I was going to be a naval aviator. So yes, I said it, Proton. Um, what ended up happening through the course was this OTS opportunity that happened. But going through it, when I was at Texas A&M, I had this upperclassman, and they would always pull us into the room if we did something bad, and we'd have to do push-ups. So I remember going into his room, I'm doing push-ups, and up on the wall is this big, long, very infamous F-15E poster that basically it's like probably like 4 foot long, and it was up on his wall. And I remember doing push-ups and watching that or seeing that, and that picture of the F-15E really just kind of stuck with me. So I go to pilot training. You show up day one, and everybody that's been out there that did this experience, what do you want to fly? Like, what do you want to do? And from day one, I was like, oh, F-15E, that's what I want to do. And what's interesting is through the course of pilot training, I changed it to F-16. I was going to do F-16 because of the single seat aspect of it. And then towards the last week, I was doing a low fly training sortie, flying with a guy named M. Todd Miller. And M. Todd Miller asked me, hey, I saw, he was the assistant flight commander. He's like, I saw on your selection sheet, you changed from F-15E to F-16. Why? And the reason he was asking me that question is because he was going after that assignment, going to be going to the F-15E. And so we had always kind of talked about, hey, F-15E, all this cool stuff. And he's like, why did you change? And I told him, and I said, yeah, but I'm having second thoughts. I really want to go fly the Strike Eagle. Like, that's in my heart. He goes, I'll take care of it. So on my selection sheet, I still have it to this day, it's crossed out with a little bit of whiteout, and F-15E is handwritten in by him, and that's how I got it. So graduated, at the top of my class with another guy named Jesse Winters. We were kind of in parallel. He ended up going F-16. I went to the Strike Eagle, and that's how I ended up in the F-15E, which was a blessing, and loved it. Loved every minute of it.
Well, that's it, and the understatement right there, top of your class that you just sort of slid in, because that's when you get to pick, right? Like, that's...
Yeah. You get to pick, but it's all based on merit, and it's based on your flight commander ranking. And so, the whole perception that people are ego and they're jerks and all that stuff, that might be true in some cases, but the instructors are really dedicated about trying to find the people who are really good team players and who are going to excel in stressful situations, and they try to match up with what you're going to do by giving you this flight commander ranking, which is very much based in teamwork and work ethic and all these kinds of different things. So you have your flight scores, but you have your flight commander ranking as well, which a lot of times will be based in how your peers view you. And so if you're a jerk and you're not a very good teammate, you're probably not going to get a very good flight commander ranking, which would lower your rank in the, kind of in the stack. So yeah, I was lucky. I mean, I think looking back in hindsight, I was just kind of at a different mental level, based on my kids and starting a family and all that. And these guys were all younger, and they were just out of the academy or college, and they're pushing it up, having a good time. Good on them. I was just, I had to put food on the table at home, and so I was just kind of, anchored to that a little bit more. And I think it gave me an advantage. Just, so.
That makes a lot of sense. So in that environment, tell me about your first, after that, when you actually get a chance to learn flying the F-15.
Yeah. So this is a memory that sticks with me forever. Okay. And before you go to fly, your fighter plane, you go do something called Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals. I think they're going to continue that process now and into the future, but back then it's a validation course between training and the fighter to kind of make sure you're ready to go do the fighter stuff. And so I remember pitching out and landing, and we pop open the canopies, and my instructor's in the back seat, and I remember thinking to myself, holy cow, my next flight will be in an F-15E Strike Eagle, and it just blew my mind because it's a dream. I've been thinking about it. It was an up and down crazy, year of training, and my next flight's going to be in an F-15E Strike Eagle. So that had to kind of like resonate. So then I go to training, and I drive onto the base of Seymour Johnson, which is where they do the formal training unit there, and there's 2 squadrons that do it. And that's kind of interesting because I drove in as a brand new butter bar lieutenant, and then eventually that will be my final assignment as the boss of the base, the wing commander. So that part was just crazy, but as I reflect back on it. But I remember taking off in the jet, flying the first time, feeling the power. But the thing that sticks with me the most is I didn't know where in the cross check that I should be looking, because there were 5 different places you could look for DME. There were 5 different places for airspeed and all these different things. And so I had to kind of really learn how to use the heads up display as my primary focus area. And that took a long time to kind of get into your cross check. And so the most challenging phase of training, F-15 basic training, doing the weapons school, all of the other training stuff that I had to do, those first 5 transition flights where I was just learning the cross check was by far the hardest part of my F-15 training. People will say different, but I just remember it really affected me greatly. So anyways, just food for thought.
Just like information overload from the cockpit?
It was, yeah, 100%. And just kind of processing it. One of the things that's, as I became an instructor down the road, I would always spend time with getting to know the students up front and asking them their academic background. So a lot of people think, you got to be an engineer to be really successful in that world, et cetera. I was a, criminal justice major, Bachelor of Arts. And so a lot of times when I'd sit down and talk to these folks that I was going to teach, I'd ask them their degree, And if they told me they were, some kind of really hardcore engineering, then what ended up happening a lot of times is in the jet, they'd be trying to do the math. I was like, hey man, like I don't need you to do the math. I just need you to do this thing right when you make this. And there are two decisions you need to make, this one and that one, no math. And sometimes they had a hard time kind of getting through that because they were just processing all the information and trying to, quote unquote, do the math. So yeah, it was information overload back then. Seeing that and how we did things and how it's transitioned to the fighters of the day, I got to spend a lot of time, let's say, doing development work in new and future concepts when I was at Boeing and Phantom Works. And the way we're presenting information today to a fighter pilot for an evolving battle in real time is much different and actually really cool about the things that we're talking about and presenting to them, and then the decisions that the fighter pilots have to make based on that information. It's completely a different approach, and it's really exciting and really cool to see.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about that. One of the things that is so striking to me, F-15 is certainly an aircraft that as a kid I remember like really close to my heart. And one of the things so striking about it is its sheer size. And given the aircraft you had flown up until that point, that I mean they don't really compare to the power and the size in most cases. Tell me about what you had flown and then what it was like the first time you actually took flight in it.
Yeah, so the planes I had flown up to that point, Cessna 172, they put me through a flight screening program in something called the T3 Firefly, which was this little aerobatic single engine plane made by Slingsby. Then I went to T-37 and T-38. And so just to put it into context, T-38 felt big because you had your G suit on and you climbed up the ladder and you got in the plane and it felt kind of high. And then you go to the F-15 and you climb up the ladder and you like look down and you almost get afraid of heights because you're like way up there. And then you look back across the wings and it's, they call it the flying tennis court, but it's just gigantic, And so just the sheer size of it, when you strapped in, you were like on this horse, which was really cool. I remember pulling in, all my F-16 buddies are going to go, he's just, talking bad about the F-16s. But whenever we'd be at Nellis and we'd be doing a red flag or a weapons school sortie or something like that, we would pull into the end of runway and get ready to take off. And everybody else would pull in, and we could look over their canopy and see and they would be looking up at us and we'd be, standing up there looking at them. And it was just like, yeah, we're cooler than you, we can carry more weapons, et cetera. So
size
at the
matter.
time, the F-15E, it was a machine. Yeah, absolutely. I didn't want to say that, but absolutely. So yeah, it was really, really cool.
Do you remember the first time you put the throttles forward and felt that?
Yeah. So the 220 engine on the F-15E, the first lots, wasn't like super powerful. And the reason being in North Carolina, it's kind of hot, and so you're doing your first flights in the summertime. And, I remember kind of being a little underwhelmed from the first time I advanced a 220 engine Strike Eagle. Then I went to England and flew that's where I met some of the folks we were talking about. But I remember flying the 229 Strike Eagles with the bigger engines. And my first flight in that was was a cold or cooler day. And I remember advancing the throttles into max power for that sortie with a guy named Killer in my back seat. And he told me he took the jet real quick and had to pull it up because I was about to overspeed the gear. Everything was happening so fast and the power, you really, kind of felt it. And so I'll never forget that sortie as far as the power that I felt. And it was what I expected the Strike Eagle to feel like. When I first took off in the Seymour Johnson 220 Strike Eagle, didn't feel like that. When I took off in the 229 Lakenheath Strike Eagle, completely different experience.
Wow. So tell me about your deployments then, following getting indoctrinated into the F-15.
Yeah, so I did a couple up front. I remember, so I did a Southern Watch rotation where we deployed to Kuwait and we were flying kind of, I remember my first combat sortie in, kind of 2000-ish timeframe. So pre 9/11, and actually this was 1999, so pre 9/11. And I remember taking off at night. My first combat sortie was a night flight. I was number 6 in the package. we're actually number 4 in the package. Sorry, I am not on night vision goggles, and we are flying in southern Iraq. And I remember we're kind of doing this box, if you will, this rotation, and and I remember like all of a sudden looking down and seeing AAA shooting at us, like doop, doop, doop. You could see the tracers in the air. And so flying fighter jets, like you could be the worst pilot or the youngest, most inexperienced pilot, but the one thing you absolutely cannot do is you cannot sound scared on the radios. You have to sound cool. So I remember seeing that. I'm flying with a guy named Lurch in my back seat. I see the AAA, and it's actually, fairly close to us because we're tailing Charlie. I'm a young guy. And so I see that, and I take a deep breath. I'm like, and then I make my call, because it was all about just making sure that I wasn't, sounding stupid, or sounding scared. So that was my first, welcome to combat kind of sortie. Young pilot, young crewmate in the back, and yeah, I'll never forget that. That was the first sortie we saw AAA. It was nuts. Did a whole bunch of other things there. I had my first combat employment where we, dropped some bombs on an SA-2 launcher, near Mosul. And then, kind of went through, that was like, those deployments were, great because they were only like 3 months. Since then we've had, 6, 7, 8 month deployments for folks. The recent 20, when Ukraine was invaded by Russia, one of our fighter squadrons, F-15 fighter squadrons, was deployed. They were gone for like 7 months. They were supposed to be gone for a month. And then Russia came across the line, and they got re-rolled from an exercise right into flying defensive counter, and they ended up extending. So you can just imagine the burden that goes on to families, the service required, the children, the spouses that are left behind. Like it's just a lot. So, but anyways, yeah. So that was kind of my initial salvo into kind of flying, and doing combat missions, et cetera. But so yeah, that's what I'd say.
There, and a quick aside, I mean, obviously we got comments from lots of people. We don't usually do too much with that, but I will say Ahab says hello.
Ahab! Ahab was my crew dog, yeah. I love Ahab, yeah. Good man. Good to see you, buddy. Good to see you.
So, one of the things, obviously, as opposed to flying, one of the biggest impacts that you have had on our nation's defense has been the work that you've done on the ground. And that includes merging special operations with combat air forces. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, Jeff, that's the story that I want to make sure, and I got to be careful about what I say. And there's a lot of people who've had a play in this. I had a very small part, and it's really the story of, we'll call it a customer, and the customer being, we'll call it very, very elite special forces, both, on the Army side, the Air Force side, and the Navy side. Being tasked after 9/11 to basically go find the bad guys and make them go away, bring, evil back to the evil people that did what they did, in New York. So there was a group of folks that were tasked to do that, along with the other intelligence agencies. And a lot of times when they would be going to do the mission early on, they didn't really have a lot of extra support. They would take helicopters, their own special helicopters that maybe you've seen in Black Hawk Down, something like that. They'd go do missions, actions on the objective. But in order for them to be effective, maybe what they needed to do was bring fighter jets over the top. So they might be doing 13, 14, 15 missions a night, and the helicopters can't support everything, or they didn't have enough gunships to be able to do that. So they started bringing in, fighter jets to support them. And so the integration of that really happened over several phases. The first phase was really, I would call it, pre 9/11, and those stories are in books about units in Western Iraq looking for Scuds and F-15s and A-10s being out there and doing that. But a lot of those folks didn't know who the customer was. They knew they had a mission, they were supporting someone, but they weren't brought into the plan because those units were so secretive. Then 9/11 happened, and there's a really incredible story called the Kabuki Dance, and we'll just say a current sitting general at the time was a young major, I believe, and they did the Kabuki Dance, and at the time it was the longest strike eagle mission in history. And so Mohammed Attaf, who was the number 3, Al-Qaeda, he was kind of their Secretary of Defense, if you will. They find and locate him through intelligence means, and Slokes is the flight lead. The two ship comes in, they drop 4 bombs off of his airplane with laser codes for the different bombs so that all the bombs could arrive simultaneously and drop this building. And that sortie was like 12 and a half hours long. It was crazy. So that was 9/11. There was a customer. We started to get to understand who the customer was, but again, not really brought into the team. Okay. OIF kicks off. Prior to OIF, there's a merging of the special forces community, and they go out and say, hey, getting ready to go into Iraq. This is, pre-2003, and we're going to need help navigating a really dense integrated air defense system. And so what we want you to do, fighter planes, A-10s, F-16s, F-14s at the time, F-15Es, we want you to go in, find these threats, neutralize them before we get there. And then as we're actions on, what's going to happen is you're going to have fighters over the top doing close air support. So now what was different was the crews got to meet who they were supporting. Okay. Oh. They had to develop a new language. They had to develop new tactics, and they had to get a common understanding of like how they were going to do things. Here's a great example. And I wasn't there, but this is a great story, I think, for the group. There's a dude flying in a special helicopter. They're somewhere out west, and fighter jets, and whether it's Navy or the Air Force or other countries, like to talk in threats in a concept called bullseye. So bullseye is off of a common georeference point, and then you spoke off that, and so something like bullseye 360 for 25 is 25 miles to the north, something like that from the georef, right? The helicopters don't like to use bullseye. They like to talk in terms of steer points. So they'll say a threat 10 miles from steer point 2 to the northeast or something like that. And so our guys tried to get them to basically acknowledge this change in language, this change in vernacular, vocabulary. They didn't want to do it. They're like, hey, you change to us. And so what ended up happening was to really understand the two cultures and start to integrate them. One of our guys flew on a helicopter with them with a map. And as he was talking to the F-15 flight leader, the package commander up top, he's communicating down to him where the threats are, and he's pointing on there from a bullseye to the helicopter flight lead in the back on night vision goggles. And so this idea of merging these cultures started to really happen in OIF. And so AHAB, was a part of some of that as that happened for the opening stages. And then beyond the initial actions of OIF, this is where I really wanted to kind of drill into, was this idea of using fighters to do things that had never been done before. So, one of those things was something called non-traditional ISR. So before Predator and Reaper really became propagated and there were in the numbers to be able to support, sometimes there wasn't enough. So what we had to do was develop new tactics, techniques, and procedures to support these guys, but we're going to use fighter jets as the ISR asset. And so all the fighter pilots that are probably watching this or will watch this go, yeah, I remember those days. Those sucked. But here's how some of the stuff that kind of started from that. So some really cool guys came out and really tried to connect the communities. There was a guy, we'll just call him Duke. And Duke was a ground guy. And what's funny about Duke is that Duke actually started out at the Air Force Academy and didn't make it through and enlisted in the Air Force and went and became a combat controller. And he was really good at connecting all the dots, and he was really trying to learn the language. So there was Duke, and then there was another guy. I won't say his name because a lot of people know him, but a really, really active guy that is still active doing certain things. So I won't mention his name. But the two of them kind of came in and really tried to understand the way we employed. So there I am at the weapons school. This is 2006. And we're going to develop some of these NTISR CONOPs. At the time, there was a major special operations push up in Mosul and in northern Iraq, and they wanted to use these fighters as NTISR platforms. So the 422 Test and Evaluation Squadron that does our operational tests for all the fighter jets, et cetera, at Nellis, and the weapons school get together, and we're going to support these guys in an exercise to develop new tactics. And so they come in, they bring in the FAA. The FAA builds a LTRAV, right over the top of downtown Las Vegas, and we are putting fighter jets over the top of Las Vegas, chasing these guys with our sensors as they're going, down the road, and we're basically telling them left turn, right turn, and basically coming into this idea of this integrated fight where now I'm a part of your team. I know you, you know me. We know each other's call signs. We've broken bread. We know what's going on, and now all of a sudden this path, this merging of the teams, all of a sudden started to kind of come together, which was really cool. And so that led to things like in 2012, a really cool hostage rescue mission whereby a bunch of, we'll call it special people, jumped out of the back of an MC-130 20 miles out, floated in at basically 17,000 feet on oxygen, and you had fighter jets, F-15s, around them as they were floating down, and we were using our sensor to count the number of chutes in the stack to make sure all of them deployed well, and they were all basically flying to their point. And then there was a successful hostage rescue mission that happened, and not that the fighters did any more work than that other than be there. But what was cool about it was on the way out of that hostage rescue mission, that was one of the most recent times whereby the Army had flown, or the special operations helicopters had flown out of Somalia since Black Hawk Down. So we had F-15s over top escorting them out to make sure they were okay, because everybody was really sensitive to that. So this idea of the integration of SOF with combat air forces, naval air forces, and doing really amazing things continues to propagate today. Was really big in the serious stuff, that happened in 2017, 2018. Most people don't know, but, and you need to get some of those folks on the podcast if they'll talk, but there were F-15s and, F-22s in full up dogfights with Russian aircraft. The only thing that didn't happen, and the Navy was obviously out there as well, but I can't speak to their experience. But the only thing that prevented anything from happening was really trained, empowered, incredibly intelligent, special young fighter pilots and fighter wizzos making the right decisions in the interests of the nation. And it was really, really incredible to watch, because they were dogfighting at night. They were outnumbered sometimes. They had clearance to fire. Like everything going on, full up, like something out of Top Gun, uncaged, weapons like ready to go. And for whatever reason, made the right decision, to de-escalate. And I remember being the operations group commander, at Lakenheath and welcoming them home. The 492nd had just deployed to do the siege of Raqqa for ISIS, the counter-ISIS fight. And they were telling me all these stories about all these crazy engagements with the Russian aircraft. And it was just absolutely amazing. So this transition of special operations all the way through continues to propagate and continues to basically be a way in which you meld air power with special operations, and you can do really, really amazing stuff for the nation. So a lot of talk there, Jeff, but I thought maybe hopefully people thought that was cool and wanted to tell you that story.
It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. And just to be clear, which conflict was the dogfighting and the conflict directly with Russian pilots in?
Yeah, no, that's good. So Operation Inherent Resolve. So the later parts, of everything that was going on in Syria, and so you had the Syrian regime as it was falling. You had the Russians to try to prop up the Assad regime. You had ISIS in there. You had a lot of complexity, plus the Turks. All of that crazy stuff was going on. And, we were there. Our guys were there to support that. And that's where that was happening. Yeah,
and
crazy stuff.
Almost just due to judgment that weapons didn't actually get fired.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk to, I remember there were 26, 28-year-old folks charged with, making crazy, decisions. And you ask them, like, what were you thinking here? What was going on in your mind? They're like, hey, I did what I was trained to do. There's a really crazy story whereby this two-ship is coming in, and they see this four-ship of Russian jets basically going at what looks like a friendly position to drop bombs. And so they're told, that they're clear to engage by the head of the area, the lead general. And as they're converting, they lose, comms to be able to get any kind of additional guidance. So there's about 37 seconds of silence. and they're making the decision at that point what they're going to do. And there's a whole mix-up. It's all happening at night. Our folks are on NVGs, night vision goggles, and needless to say, they basically determine that the 4 ship of Russian aircraft are actually not going to bomb this one place, and they're going to go do this other thing. And so they break off, they de-escalate, and don't, basically engage. And so huge kudos. This was something in the weapons school, something in the formal training unit of training, our folks. It was moving beyond teaching people what to think, and it was moving towards teaching people how to think. And that was the important thing that I was very proud about, the way our community trained our aviators, and the results are, amazing. And hopefully the stories are told about the F-15 community and all the men and women that serve in it.
That's incredible. Tell me about your experience at weapons school.
Yeah, no, weapons school is great. This is nuts. So I was having breakfast with a good friend of mine, and he and I were crew dogs at the weapons school. And we were in 04 Alpha, so 21 years ago, So you go to the weapons school, you don't really know what it's all about, and just some incredible instructor talent. You're going through it. There are some people that you like because they're kind of the good cop, and then there are some people that you just despise because they're the bad cop. But everybody's there to make you the best. And what was cool about being around the weapons school and being an instructor there was this really deep drive to be the best for America and for the team. And so one of the things that was really cool for me is I got to be lead integration. So I would lead something called the tactical integration phase for the F-15s. And so what I would do is go bring other assets together, and we'd have these missions that were almost unsolvable problems. And we wanted to see how the students reacted because there was no right answer. And at that point, we were really testing mettle, and we're testing, fortitude and how they were going to react in very, very dynamic situations. So I got to see the very best of people as they would rise to the occasion. But what was cool was, as an integration subject matter expert, I could go down the hallway and talk to the intel person with the best intel patch. They knew how to do it. Like, I'd ask them a question, they would give me the PhD level answer. Many of those folks have gone on to do, incredible work. They're 2- and 3-star generals doing amazing stuff. This was, the best F-22 person, the best A-10 pilot. I learned so much from my peers and the other instructors there that it was such a privilege to be there. And the build, teach, lead kind of mantra that was at the weapons school and all the integration stuff holds true. General Kane, who is a weapons school graduate, and just for General Kane, he's the chairman. He had a huge hand in a lot of the special operations integration stuff. So if you ever talk to him, he's got some really cool stories about the things that he's done. But General Kane, during the recent Iran strikes, talked about the weapons school and patch wearers and planning and the B2s and all that. And so that just shows you when where the rubber meets the road. If the Air Force is called to go do a mission, chances are the patch wearers are going to get called in to help plan that. Not that other people that don't wear patch wearers, they don't get included. They do. And I could name 100 folks who weren't weapons school graduates who were just as good, if not better. But you get that accreditation at that that academic background from the weapons school, and it's all of that other exposure, the exposure to special programs, special capabilities, integration concepts that other folks don't get, and that's really what's valued, and it continues to be valued by the Air Force and the nation.
That is so impressive, and the fact that you both attended and taught at the weapons school. Tell me about the difference in those perspectives of going there first as a student and then understanding how you have to look at that from a different perspective to make the best of people instead of what it felt like to go through it.
Yeah, it's funny because the whole weapons school experience was just kind of getting through one day at a time, and my frustration a lot of times was the instructor, I wasn't there for the instructors were there for me. And so my journey and all my students, all my peers that were going through the course, their journey was different. But I was trying to, as I was experiencing, what is called the wall, which is about halfway through a 6-month course. All right, a little bit different than Top Gun. We focus on the basics and the hardcore stuff like Top Gun does, but then we branch out a little more. They focus on the carrier wing and integration of that. We do some other things that that are in our doctrine in the Air Force, but not in the Navy. So different focuses at some point they diverge. But you hit the wall, and when you hit the wall, you want to start blaming everybody else, And it's really that time to look in the mirror. Number one, acknowledge that you're on your own journey. Number two, and number three, like figure out the challenge of how to get through it, because at that point you probably have never been pushed that hard. I mean, it's 21 years now. I'm retired. I can talk about it, but I remember getting up, walking out with my crewmate. We're getting ready to go fly a jet. He looks me in the eye and goes, "Hey man, are you ready to fly? We're going to go in. We're going to do a 100-foot ingress at 600 miles an hour, carrying bombs. We're going to bomb a target with live bombs, fight our way in, fight our way out at 100 feet. And sometimes it's at 50 feet because you're trying to mask from threats." And so he turns me around and he goes, "Hey, are you okay to fly?" And I go, "Bro, I didn't sleep at all last night. You need to kind of, I said, I'm good, I think. But if it starts to get a little squirrely, just call knock it off and we'll climb." And so intense trust between the two of us, the front seater and back seater, probably should have made the call right then, but felt the pressure to perform and not wanting to let down my teammates, et cetera. And it's that desire that's good, but it's also bad sometimes because you have to have the right judgment. So that's the thing, that as you transition from a student to an instructor, now you're kind of managing this flow, this psychology of learning, the stressors. And as you manage the flow for your students, you want to make sure that not only are you challenging them, but someday you got to have your relationship intact, because when you leave, you want them to reach out to you and use you as a mentor and a resource, and so that the relationship isn't broken. My problem, as I was going through my course, I basically burned the bridge with a couple of them and then didn't want to talk to them because they were bad cop and I was mad at them. And then, but it was the wrong approach. I was just ignorant. I should have been more mature with that. But I really paid attention to that when I became an instructor, because I learned that lesson. And I think, hopefully the majority of my students like me, although I know a couple that probably don't. But hey, it's all good. You can't be liked by everybody. So that's how I respond.
Well, I mean, as we said in the introduction, you went on to command the Joint Special Operations Aviation Detachment Fighter Squadron Operations Group and the largest F-15 fighter wing in the Air Force. What are some of the lessons from that, especially making those safety decisions you just described of, are you really ready? I mean, what are some of the things you took out of that experience and employed as a commander?
Yeah, so number one, it's all about the people. So anybody that puts the mission or their career or any of that forward as first is the wrong person that needs to be in that seat. And I think the services are all collectively looking at how they cultivate leadership and the right leaders that value the right things to take care of people, facilitate those cultures that are winning in defense of the nation. So my hat's off to everybody that's still out there doing that. So people are at the center of it all. That's the first one. The second one is the Air Force didn't do a really good job of teaching you risk. Like what was risk? Like, so we had these ORM checklists, objective risk management, where you'd score it, and if it was red, you wouldn't take off, or if it was green, everything was okay. But a lot of times you just filled that out, turned it in, and didn't even think about it, And so you didn't really manage risk well. You didn't really understand the concept of what it was. When I went to Fort Bragg and I was working with the special operators, they really had a good grasp of risk. Like, they really understood it as a planning constraint and also as a real-time constraint. And this idea of risk, because a lot of times if they didn't manage it well, they weren't coming home. So they just put a different prioritization on it. And I think overall, learning all the way from an aviation detachment all the way through, and I managed, or we had a Class A mishap in a far off place with a aircraft. I won't get into the location or the type of aircraft, but that fundamentally changed how I looked at the world and in my leadership, because I never wanted to ever have to go through that ever again. So the loss, and this is the part that people don't really understand, but as aviators, You're up at 20,000 feet. You know, you don't. Whenever something happens or somebody gets hurt, it really shocks you. It's different on the ground because you're up close and personal. So when that happened to this unit deployed, I was, you know, running the detachment, and I had this squadron commander friend who's now a 2-star, and it was his squadron, and it happened. I watched the whole dynamics of it, and so this idea of risk. And then the third thing is this. I mean, training, 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 training. So you reap what you sow. You know, you reap what you sow. You really have to put the best of the best in your training infrastructure to facilitate building incredible people and follow on. And that was something that I think we did really well in the strike field community. We learned lessons from the F-15C community, for example. In the formal training units that were tasked with educating and training new pilots, new F-15 pilots, they would only send their very best back to be formal training unit instructors. We did the same thing in the F-15E community, and the results, you know, spoke for themselves. When I was a squadron commander, my entire squadron were distinguished flying crosses, instructor hours, you know, combat time. They were elite. They were a really, really tight unit, and they made some really, you know, or trained some really amazing people who've all started to grow up, and they're doing amazing things out there, and I'm super proud of all of them. So yeah, anyways, good stuff.
Absolutely. Tell me about the term you've talked about, agile combat, and how that.
Yeah. Yeah, so it'll dovetail into the talk about Electra, but you know, agile combat employment is a way in which you deploy small packages of aircraft. So the legacy way in which we deploy aircraft, you know, for the Air Force specifically, 18, 24 jets, 12 jets, and with that comes a lot of deployment burden as far as equipment, ground support equipment, et cetera. If you want to put chess pieces on the chessboard really, really fast, you got to get smaller. And so agile combat employment is really this idea of small packages of aircraft with, you know, small packages of people bouncing around in various locations, complicating enemy targeting and doing, you know, different kinds of things. And so there's a whole story about how that started in the Pacific with F-22s and, you know, some folks that may or may not come on and talk about some of that. But that's a big, long story. I had a hand in it in 2010. It moved forward. In 2019, we did a full-up agile combat employment exercise into Europe. This is pre-Ukraine invasion. And it was the lessons learned as a wing commander doing that in Europe with F-15s and F-35s right on the border of Kaliningrad, you know, Russia, flying and seeing flankers like right across the border, and our folks and kind of deploying these small packages in the Baltics. Like all of that framed how I think about the Air Force's new way of fighting and how I think in industry I can best support that to the warfighter. And so I'm excited to tell you about, you know, what I'm up to next in my current capacity.
Let's talk about that. And I'm going to start by sharing something here. And the first thing, just as a quick treat, since we've been talking about it, of course, is here's your ride that you had for so many years before your current role, and then here's what's going on now.
Yeah. So this is my company, Electra. It was that SOF, Special Operations Forces, the agile combat employment. One of the big lessons learned I took away from my experience there doing all that stuff was we needed our own airlift to be able to facilitate resupply and maneuver if I'm going to be in charge of, you know, an event or, you know, as a wing commander. And so I left Boeing. I saw this platform. This is the demonstrator. It's called the EL2. And what's cool about it is it uses something called distributed electric propulsion enabled by hybrid propulsion. And you can put those motors, those electric motors across the wing and do something called blown lift. You blow the wing, you make the aircraft think that it's going faster than it really does. And you can do crazy stuff like ultra short takeoff and landing inside of 150 feet. So we just had we did our first like commercial demo down at Virginia Tech, and we were able to take off in a 300 by 75 foot runway at a UAS, hangar or field down there. We're able to land on roads. We're able to take off from, a dirt strip and land basically in less than 100 feet. So EL2, that demonstrator, has all kinds of really cool, aerodynamic technology using the hybrid stuff. But what we're building is the EL9, which is this really, 9-passenger commercial thing that can take off and do something called direct aviation. But on the government side, we think this is the perfect ACE platform. This is perfect for agile combat employment. You can carry people, you can make it autonomous, you can carry AMRAAM missiles or fuel, you can help resupply and do the things that you need to do in agile combat employment, as well as transport people. And that's why Electra, everything we're doing with our path moving forward, is starting to gain significant steam. And really, really excited about it. Thanks for the time to let me talk it out.
Well, so tell me a little bit about the hybrid drive. So this is not just an electric aircraft or anything like that. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jeff. A lot of stuff in the advanced air mobility. A lot of eVTOLs, electric vertical takeoff and landing, jets and cars flying around. All that stuff is really, really, really cool. The idea of being able to do things and the things that some of the companies are talking about is really cool. But I think what the government, the military is really finding out is that electric only burns out, it doesn't give you the range and the duration. You can't lift as much. And so what Electra did 4 years ago is it started hybrid propulsion. So it's got a turbo generator on board. The turbo generator keeps the batteries, kind of charged. And so the combination of the two, acting very similar to a Prius. It's not a Tesla, it's a Prius. And so because of that, now you've got range, you can carry payload. And when you need short bursts of power, you can amp up the batteries. You can take off and land in really short distances. And you can also, if you want to, turn the turbo generator off, come in on battery power only, and be sub 55 dB in sound, and do a quiet infill of special people or exfil of special people if you wanted to do that, and then charge your battery back up. So lots of utility on what we're doing specifically in hybrid propulsion.
It's really fascinating to me that it's because of the hybrid propulsion and the duration that you've got, and then also the technology that you're employing, that this seems to be fairly unique in terms of it. As you mentioned, it has applications across the spectrum. It has unmanned applications, it has passenger, it has cargo applications, and very much has military applications.
Yeah, it's what's cool on the commercial side is, regional air mobility and everything that we could potentially do with a blown lift, ultra short aircraft. It really boggles the mind about access. So for example, we've got Snowshoe Ski Resort here on the East Coast. It's a really nice place down in West Virginia. For me to get there from DC, it's about 4.5 hours. How cool would it be to take off out of DC from a parking garage or some other access point, go up there and land directly, offload my skis, etc., while it lands in a basically a dirt field, and be able to do that direct access point kind of direct aviation point, and that would fundamentally change the way in which we do regional air mobility. The idea of going out to a parking lot, you're at your home, you get on the plane picks you up and takes you right into the airport. Instead of it landing at the congested part of the runway, it actually lands on a taxiway, or it lands on the apron, offloads you into a security terminal, you go through the checks, you're right there, and it's just cut all kinds of mess on your timing. That in and of itself could revolutionize not only the commercial side, but obviously you can see the government and defense application.
Yeah, and this image really shows the distributed power plants that really make this blown lift technology work. Can you explain the blown lift technology concept?
Yeah, so what you do, and blown lift has been around for a while. NASA did a whole bunch of stuff on something called the X-67. There's some pioneers out in the industry that had their hands in that. The C-17 uses blown lift technology, but you couldn't really generate the amount of lift that you needed to do it because of the size of the turbine engines, et cetera, on these types of or sizes of aircraft. So now with the advent of electric motors, you can make smaller motors, you can distribute them across the wing, and because you can power them up, you can basically do this blown lift, distributed electric propulsion, and that's what enables you to be able to do the things that you want. So I'm down at Virginia Tech, I'm watching this thing. This is, again, that's our demonstrator. That's not the actual product that will deliver the market, but watching it come in, our test pilot experienced Marine Corps test pilot named Mo is flying it into land, and it's coming in at like 28 knots of approach speed. It looks like it's going to stall, and you're holding your breath because you're like, and then all of a sudden he plants it, it lands, and it stops really quickly, and it just kind of totally like changes the way you look at aviation, and you're just kind of like, wow, what did I just witness? And then he turns around and basically takes off again, in the same amount of distance, and you just look at that and go, whoa. So distributed electric propulsion hybrid is going to really change the way in which we do stuff. And not to knock any of the amazing companies that are doing eVTOL out there, but I think there's definitely a play for hybrid in the range and payload required both on commercial and defense for our platform.
Well, it eliminates some of the really key problems of that, where we aren't there yet, essentially, with having the endurance that's needed. How do you see for this the infrastructure evolving? Because it seems like for everyone that's going after different types of urban air mobility or other types of missions, I've always had this question of, okay, so we've had helicopters, obviously, very expensive and limited in what they can do with helipads. And of course, we have regular commercial and regular traditional aviation. With this whole segment evolving, it seems like we need infrastructure to evolve with it, including air traffic control, landing sites, all this kind of stuff. Will it really be, do you think, top of a parking garage kind of thing? Or what's the future that you guys really talk about?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. I think there will be, some of those, we'll call it aggressive, different ways which you could do things. The parking garage, the road, or something like that. Those could be in play. And I think they will be in play ultimately. The second side, the infrastructure, that is definitely something that I think we imagine access ports, access points, but we don't require a charging station, like some of the other folks do. We do require fuel. We need fuel for the turbo generator to operate. And so there will be some requirements based on those kinds of things. But overall, I think watching the advanced air mobility, whether it's eVTOL, where it's hybrid, direct aviation, ultra short aircraft, like watching the way in which we're going to evolve airports, access points of the future, how you access these services, it's kind of exciting to watch. And to be honest with you, I mean, we have some thoughts about them. I'll save them from another time from the commercial team. We'd love to have them come on and you could talk to them about that stuff. Yeah, we're in discussions with folks. We're talking about things, and I think the vision of the future is very, very bright for these types of concepts for everybody.
And of course, it's so cool that we're talking about something that is currently flying. Like you just mentioned, you've seen it, you watched it fly. Like this is real in the demonstrator, and
yeah, it is. It's cool. I mean, that's the thing, right? So a lot of times when you go in and you work in a company, you take a concept and it's on PowerPoint, and you go, hey, this is what we got, and people look at it and go, oh. When you show them a video, they actually get to see it, or they would put them in the airplane to fly it, and they're like, holy cow, did we just take off in 80 feet? 100, less than 100 feet? And they're like, yeah. And so they see it, and they basically press the I believe button. And so having the demonstrator really hammers that home. And we've been on a tear recently with some of our government folks that we've brought in. I won't mention their names. They can manage their own announcements, but it's been a pantheon of the who's who currently in the government. So it's been good stuff.
That's awesome. And of course, the nice part of splitting the applicability between defense and commercial is that you don't have to wait on those things to happen in terms of infrastructure, because if you are deployed in this, evolves into that, well, no one cares. You find a suitable spot and you do the mission, and
yeah,
that's a pretty key difference.
The big thing to remember is it's just an airplane. So we're not doing any crazy stuff. We're a Part 23 certified, airplane moving forward. That's the plan. We're just an airplane. So I think we have a pretty good path, knock on wood, certification. And I think we're going to be out there and we're going to be a player. So look to see Electra EL9s all over the place. And Jeff, hopefully we can revisit your podcast and maybe even, have you out to the site for an on-site podcast. We'll see.
Sign me up. Absolutely. No
Yeah.
question about it. Would love to see that thing fly. Well, Don, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to join us here on Social Flight Live. It's really been fascinating. I appreciate and I'm grateful for your service, for everything that you've done, and for bringing us kind of in the loop to understand some things that are so important about the work that you and so many other people did with special operations and getting us to a place that we are today, um, that I think is critical to our nation's defense.
No, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for the words. Obviously, having the invitation to come on was great to be able to tell that story. There are so many people that are still out there doing the work. My hat's off to them. I love them. But yeah, they're humble. They don't talk about what they're doing. So now that I'm out, I can tell. So I just wanted to tell the story about them, the sacrifices they make, the sacrifices their families make, and everything they do for the nation. And I'll tell you, they love doing it. So, anyways, got to brag on them a little bit.
Absolutely, and I look forward to talking about Electra more in the future. So again, thank you so much for coming on, and have a wonderful evening.
Take care, Jeff. We'll see you. Thanks.
All right, take care. And to all of you, thank you for taking time out of your evening to join us here again on Social Flight Live. And for those of you, again, that I had the chance to meet in person, thanks for flagging me down, taking some time, spending a little bit with me, and I hope you also got something out of that. We'll be back next week, April 5th, Tuesday, April 5th, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific, with Justin Payne, director of NASA's Multi-Mission Operations Center. We're going to go inside that center in terms of like understanding what is going on. There's so much going on in NASA. You'll get a lot of your questions answered. And Justin is just a wonderful human being. His personal story, I'll give you a quick heads up, is going to absolutely drop your jaw. It is remarkable where he came from to get to where he is. It's a special show, so please join us next Tuesday night here on Social Flight Live for that show. And then following that on Tuesday, August 12th, it's our Cockpit to Cowl show with Brian Schiff. To register for that show, go to cockpit, the number 2 and the word cowl, cockpit2cowl.com. You can register for that show. It is absolutely fantastic. I love spending time with Brian. We talk about the combined perspective of flight instructors, commercial airline pilots, myself on the mechanics side of things. And we're going to talk about a really cool subject, and that is evaluating your experts. How do you really make sure that the folks that you rely on in every facet of your aviation life, you're getting the best that you really need for your own safety and personal development and all of that. So it's going to be a great show with Brian. Until next time, thank you so much for everything that you do for general aviation and for joining us here for another episode of Social Flight Live. I'll see you next week, and I wish you all blue skies.